So that song was my first band, Zakariah, from back in the mid-90s. Let's take these headphones off. And that was jamming in a stairwell of an animation studio that we were working at as we were doing contracts for Walt Disney Television. So you're here to learn some Stable Diffusion. Hopefully, that's the plan. If you haven't installed Stable Diffusion, there is a link to Stable Diffusion that you can run on your computer locally. I've got a fan on, so hopefully it's not causing too much problems with sound. The only trouble with running it locally, and I know somebody mentioned this, is that things were getting slow and starting to lag out on their computer, and that their GPU was overheating. Now, Stable Diffusion is really GPU hungry, so you're going to have to be aware of that. You have to run this when you're running on your local server. You have to run really high-end Nvidia, preferably Nvidia graphics card or the equivalent. And I have 64 gigabytes of RAM on my computer, so I've kind of got a fast computer to begin with. So just bear that in mind. It will get laggy and you will have issues if you have a slow computer or even just an average computer. I found an app actually on the Stable Diffusion group that I'm part of. I found an app called Crayon, Craiyon, Crayon. This is it on Google Play. It's not focused. On Google Play, Crayon, with this little, I guess, crayon icon. Now that runs on your Android phone. I assume that runs on your iPhone as well. You might want to try Crayon. Let's check this. So yeah, that you won't have half the options that you do with Stable Diffusion, the version that we're using. You won't have the control over it. It doesn't have image to image. But if you just want to generate some AI images and you don't have a fast computer at all, or a computer at all, but you do have a cell phone, try Crayon. Have a play with just doing text prompts. Apparently it's really bad at doing faces. So again, my preference at the moment, you know, compared to Midjourney, though I've heard that Midjourney's got some changes. Compared to Midjourney or any other kind of like DALL-E, my favorite's still Stable Diffusion at the moment, or this version of Stable Diffusion, which is on GitHub. It's free at the moment and it's free to run. That's the other thing I like about it. With Midjourney, you're paying. With I think it's Dream. Is it Dream Studio? There's another one that integrates with Huggy Face, but it's using a server online, and because it's using a server online, it's charging you money for that. So I don't have the money, so I'm trying to do things at a local level where I don't have the money because I've invested it all into the hardware of the computer, and I'd rather invest in hardware and a computer and have control here over, you know, everything that I'm generating than like pay for a service so that I can have access to their computing power. But I am a professional computer operator, so, you know, I've got a reason to have all this hardware. But just bear that in mind. So I'm going to pick up from where I was with the last version. So let's go into Photoshop. So on the last video, we kind of had this, we're at this point where I generated all these kind of layers. So if I'll just hide that. So we got to this point and I ended the stream, and I didn't really have this up when I was compositing everything after I created the sky level. So now I can actually, I've got the preview up and I can see what everybody sees as well now. So I figure I'm just going to redo this in part before I start dropping things into After Effects and giving them some motion in this video, but that's the plan. You're going to take this image, or these layers in Photoshop that have been processed in Stable Diffusion, and we're going to drop them into After Effects and give them just a little bit of motion. And maybe some lighting effects. Oh, I just realised I got it. Right, let me just repeat what I was saying because the music was probably drowning me out a little bit. Okay, well, completely. so this is where we're at from the last video, and I kind of missed the compositing part and putting the sky in that we generated before. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the sky from the last video, the final generation, which was in reworks. Where's reworks? Output. Here it is, reworks in the quick menu. Okay, so this is the sky that we generated in Stable Diffusion last time. So, and don't worry, I'm going to recap a little bit of Stable Diffusion as well for those of you that, you know, we're having difficulty. But basically, the other thing to do is possibly if your GPU is starting, if things are starting to get laggy in Photoshop and in Stable Diffusion, if you're starting to have problems like that, close down Photoshop while you're running Stable Diffusion. Photoshop takes up a lot of RAM. It's really RAM hungry. So close Photoshop and just run Stable Diffusion. Just like let it dedicate the CPU to Stable Diffusion. That will probably help. But anyhow, this is where we were at, and I'm just going to show you quickly how we composite things together. But there's a layer that I wasn't happy with, which was this branches layer. So I'm going to redo the branches in Stable Diffusion and see if I get a better result this time. But for starters, I just need to get rid of the blue in the background. So this is what we generated in Stable Diffusion from this. This is what we fed into Stable Diffusion in the last video that I was doing. So sorry if people, if I'm repeating myself a bit, but do have to do a bit of a recap. So I'm going to grab the Magic Wand tool, which is this little wand tool with the little sparkly stars around it, 3 sparkly stars. Hopefully you can see the icon. And the tolerance for the Magic Wand tool is currently set to 60, which should be fine, but I'm just going to pump it up to 80. And so I've selected the blue background. But yeah, maybe that's a bit better. I think that's better. So we've selected all of the blue, so I can just delete it out. I'm going to soften the edges a little bit with the selection. So I do that by going into the selection menu, and then I go down to modify and change the feathering. So go into feathering, and I'm going to change that to 3 pixels. And I'm not going to select apply affected canvas bounds. So I think it's just doing it at the edges, which is what I want. Edges of the trees and not at the edges of the frame. Yep. So so this is the blue that we've got here at the moment, the placement blue, but we're going to drop the clouds in there. So we're going to drop these clouds into the background. All of this was generated, these clouds were generated just using text prompts in Stable Diffusion. The text prompt was just clouds, and the image modifier was Claude Monet, who is this impressionist painter who's really renowned for doing water lilies. So I've just copied that. So what I did was, going back to this layer, to select all, so if I deselect, to select all, I go Control A, and that selects everything in the frame. To copy it, I go Control C, and that copies it into the clipboard. To deselect, I go Control D. So these are important shortcuts to remember, because the more you can remember these shortcuts, the faster you are as an operator, and the faster you are, the better and more efficient you are as an employee. But anyhow, I'm on top of the blue screen level, which is the lowest layer in my Photoshop file, and I'm just going to go Control V for paste. Now, if you can't remember any of these shortcuts, they're also all up here in the edit submenu, which I know my submenus aren't showing up. Yeah, they don't seem to be showing up in my preview either. But in edit, there's a submenu, and it has copy, paste, paste special, all those kind of things, and it also describes the shortcuts that I'm talking about as well. So if you get lost, just go into the submenu for the edit window. But anyhow, so this is where we're at. We've got our Monet clouds now in the background, and our kind of Monet synthesized what do you call, ground layer and background layer. We've got a foreground layer, which is really just a deformed version of what I painted in oil paints, which is this. This was the original painting. If you take the foreground away, this was the original painting that I started to synthesize. And from there, I also generated this character as a separate layer. So we have this character, this foreground element, the ground, and the sky. And we can delete the blue screen now because we have our clouds. Actually, Control Z. No, I'm just going to keep that there because it's an important tool for a second. I probably don't need it, but just in case. So now at the moment I've just got the cloud selected, and now what I want to do is I want to make this a little bit more realistic. At the moment, if we look at the actual original image without the foreground, this horizon line, you know, has a bit of distance to it, while when I've got my other background over the top, it's blocking all that distance. So one thing I can do is just move the whole background up, the whole cloud up like that. And then if I unselect the background, it's not quite at the right place at the moment, so, but I can just move it down until it's kind of about at the right place. I know I've got these trees that aren't supposed to be there, but you know, it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this. Or I could just clone them out. So say that I'm not happy with, you know, those trees shouldn't be there. What I can actually do, if I just raise this up, is grab the clone brush, which is this tool here, clone stamp tool, and select a part of it where there are no trees, the sky. So this is a part that there are no trees. I press down Alt, and that is my image clone stamp selection tool, and click on to the area that I want to clone. Now I can hold over what I want to clone out and then simply just start brushing over the top, and that will clone out those trees which were affecting that kind of horizon line. And I'm going to do it with these trees as well. So same deals, holding down the Alt button and then right clicking onto the area that we want to clone, and then I'm just painting over the trees. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So now I can move it down and get that nice distance look to the clouds while still retaining, you know, my original horizon line without any trees popping up that shouldn't be there. Now the thing that I went over last time when I was on the wrong screen in the last video was using AI within Photoshop, because Photoshop has artificial intelligence built into it now. There's in their filters. So I'm going to show you that right now. If you select the background layer, this is the background. The background doesn't look quite right with the sky, and it's quite intense. So I kind of want to soften this background a bit, kind of make it blend better with the sky, because I quite like the softness and the pastel colors of the sky. So while I've got the background selected, I go up into the filters menu and go down to neural filters and bring that up, which I know actually will show my Photoshop preview. Now we're in the neural filters. This is all quite new this year, hopefully. Yep, it's showing up. And in the beta neural filters is Harmonization, and that's the tool that we're going to use, and it works quite well. So I'm going to click on Harmonization, and you'll notice it has made no difference at the moment. But that's because we've got the layer that we want to change, but we haven't got the layer that we want it to change to complement, which is the sky selected. So now in the harmonization plugin in neural filters, you can see select layer, reference image, and I'm going to go down to layer 4, which is the clouds. Now it's processing it, and what it's done is it's kind of changed our our foreground layer so it looks more like the cloud layer. It's kind of desaturated it. Maybe it's done a bit too much. At the moment, I've got it set to 75 strength, so I'm going to wind that down a little bit, and maybe even more. So now it's blending in better. And if I'll change it so it's going to make it a new layer so I can show you the difference. So now I'm pretty happy with those results. If I click OK, it'll process it and it'll appear here as a new layer. Because I created it as a new layer, I still have the background here. So if I hide that, you can see there's the original background, and this is, and this is the version that it's created that kind of complements the sky. And I think that does work a bit better. Okay, it's a bit of a subtle difference, but I think it does look a bit better. So the next thing to do is our character, which was generated on another video. I think I can go through that. I will go through this process again with another image. I've got a lot of work to do with Stable Diffusion. I've got an animation I'm working on, but for now, we'll just stick with this. Now I kind of want her to blend in nicely with everything else as well. So rather than making her reflect the sky, I'm going to make her reflect the ground and see if how that changes her. So I'm going to use that same neural plugin. Go into filters, neural filters, sorry, the neural filter. And then I'm going to go down to harmonization and select harmonization. It's going to change here onto a new layer. The reason why I'm doing it as a new layer is because I don't want to destroy the work that I've already made. And then I'm going to select layer 5, which was my enhanced background. So yeah, I think that does look better. So I'm going to go OK and let it process that into a new layer. And I noticed you can't see because they're not docked, that's why. All right, so I've just docked my layers so you can see all my layers a bit better. Just realized I didn't have it set up that way. So you can see layer 6 is the new character layer. If I hide the character layer, you can see the difference. So that's the original, and that's the processed version. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this off as a copy. So I'm going to save it off as previs. I already created this, but I'm redoing it all. And I'm going to just start to get rid of these working layers a little bit. So we'll keep the foreground for now. Actually, what we might do is we'll do 2 new Stable Diffusion seeds. We'll do a new foreground, because let's see if we can do it like a Monet style grassy foreground. And we are going to generate new branches, but not Monet styles, because I didn't like the way in which he did branches. So we're going to do 2 different generations. So we're going to delete Horizon. So Horizon was one of the original parts of the painting that I sort of reworked in the first video. I'm just going to delete it now because we're working on the previs document now. I'm going to close down Cloudy Sky. We don't need it up. The more windows you have up in Photoshop as well, the more RAM it's using. So we'll get rid of the back branches layer. That was just a guide. We'll get rid of layer 2, which is our original character layer. And I'm going to rename layer 6, which was our character. I'm going to rename it character, just so I can keep track of it, because this is a little bit of layer management. Background is a new, we've finished with that. I'm going to delete it and rename this background. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, if I'm going too fast for you, this background here is the generation that was made from the harmonization of the sky. So that's what I'm talking about. When I did the filter on the background, it created this new layer. So this is now the new background. We're going to change layer 4 to sky. We're going to leave the blue screen there for now. And we don't need front branch anymore. Actually, sorry. I'm keeping front branch as the original image, so I'm going to name it original. Original painting. So we can see how far we've come each point. So this is the original painting that I've started to process and synthesize. This is the new character. This is the reworked foreground. So let's start by reworking the foreground image. I think that's going to be easier to get results from than the twigs. And hide everything else. And we're going to unhide the blue screen. I'm just going to save my progress. And I'm going to incrementally save as well, just in case. So I'm going to go previs 01. So basically I'm saving a copy of it. And then I'm going to flatten everything. So I'm going to go into the layer submenu. You can see layers at the top here, next to image. In between image and type is layer. I'm going to go down to the second to last, which says flatten image. Go OK, so it's flattened it, and I'm going to save this off as a JPEG. So file, save as JPEG. The reason why I flattened it is it won't let me save the file off as a JPEG unless it's flattened. I'm going to rename it foreground. And this is all in my reworks folder and my AI gens. It's just I have to keep track of everything. So keep the quality at 12. And I'm not going to try and rescale it now. I noticed there was an improvement to Stable Diffusion when I was running it just before, and it seemed like it was able to deal with bigger images now. So I'm just going to fire up Stable Diffusion now. And let's jump into Stable Diffusion. So underneath my window at the moment, you can see the image prompt for Stable Diffusion, the command prompt, should I say, of Stable Diffusion as it fires up the Python and starts to communicate with the install. Again, if you haven't installed it, go to the link in the description of this video, go to the GitHub link and download it. Follow the install instructions, which is basically extract the zip file that you download into your C root folder, and then run the command prompt, and it will install itself first time around. And then every time you run that same command prompt from inside that folder, I've actually just created a link onto my desktop. It does everything for you automatically. Now I'm just going to check to see if, here we go, localhost. All right. Okay, so we're going to grab the foreground image that we just created and pull it into Stable Diffusion now. And then again, I'm going to go over the process again for how to work Stable Diffusion, how to ride Stable Diffusion. So here is the foreground with the kind of painty reeds. Now I'm not going to rescale it. At the moment it's almost a 4K image. It's quite large. It's under 2 megabytes. Before there was another thing. This version of Stable Diffusion could not deal with images that were over 2 megabytes. So maybe just the size is better now. I'm going to keep the size low for first gen. But I'm going to make the width 768 and the height 512. Actually, no, I'm going to go up 1024 and the height 768. Okay, 1024 with height 768, which should be of the same aspect ratio as the image that I created, because the image that I've downloaded was based on a scale from Stable Diffusion at 4 times the size. I'm probably not making much sense. But anyhow, I know what I'm saying. So now that we've chosen our file, we've got to make sure the prompt actually describes the file or what we want to generate, which is the foreground. So I'm going to say foreground. And I'm going to say grasses or reeds. Say reeds and grass. Long grass. Long grass will be specific. Okay, foreground reeds and long grass. Hopefully it understands that. I'm going to change, now let's go into the image settings for what we're generating. So I already changed some of the settings. I changed the image size. We're going to change the number of inference steps to 35. Okay, because that's nice and fast. I'm going to change the prompt strength down to 0.5. And I'm going to choose a different artist. I'm going to deselect fix incorrect faces and eyes because it's not a face, it's a landscape. And now we're going to go into the image modifiers. So nothing else is selected except for show only the corrected upscale image. Under that is image modifiers. You can see image style, face, and thumbnail size. I can change the thumbnail size. I'll change it up for you guys so you can see it better on the video. And I'm going to change the image style to landscape so that we can see these different landscape styles. So I'm actually not going to change the drawing style at all. So I'm going to collapse that expanded menu. And instead, I'm going to expand the visual style so we can have a look at these different art styles. So we've got anime, Baroque, CGI, we've got a lot more. We've got, I've skipped a few, 2D, 8-bit, 16-bit, anaglyph, anime, Art Nouveau, Bauhaus, Baroque, CGI, cartoon, comic book, concept art, constructionist, cubist, digital art, Dadaist, expressionist fantasy, Fauvist, figurative, graphic novel, geometric, hard edge painting, hydro-dipped, impressionistic, lithography, manga, minimalistic, modern art, mosaic, mural, naive? I haven't even heard of that. Neoclassical, photorealistic, rococo, romantic, street art, symbolistic, stuckist, surreal, visual novel, and watercolor. Now, they seem to be changing this up all the time, so there may be new visual styles that they add. I'm going to choose realistic. Even though my background image was impressionistic, because Monet is an impressionistic artist. I'm not going to choose an artist style. I'm only going to choose a visual style. So I'm not going to choose a specific artist. Okay, so it's set to 0.5. I'm going to generate 4 images. So I'm going to create 2 at once, but 4 in total. So that's in underneath image settings, underneath seed is number of images to make. So I'm going to set that to 4. Good thing I checked that. Set that to 4, and then generate in parallel, which is how many images I want to generate at the same time. I'm going to set that to 2, and now I'm going to click on make image. So now it's added this little window here, which says foreground reads long grass realistic. So that's the text part of the prompt is foreground reads and long grass, and the image modifier is realistic. Then down here you can see the seed, the sampler, the inference steps, the guidance style, and the prompt strength. We set the prompt strength and the guidance style. We set the inference steps. We didn't change the sampler because it doesn't give me the option to change the sampler in this area. Or actually, when I change this to fix incorrect faces and eyes, it is changing the sampler to a GFP GAN sampler. which is trained to deal with faces. So that's why you want to use that sampler. If I'm upscale the image using real SR GAN times 4 plus, that's a piece of AI that has been developed just to upscale an image. And I'd imagine that DDIM, in the same respect, is a sampler that has been built specifically to deal with text prompts and only text prompts, because it doesn't have to process an image. So we'll have a look next time we do it, because we'll be adding one of these generations as an image to upscale. We'll just have a look and see if it adds a sampler. If it keeps the DDIM, which it may do because it has to use the text prompt part of it as well, but it adds real which it will. It'll add real SGRAN times 4 plus, and it should appear here as an additional sampler. And this is all theoretical. So this is taking a while at the moment, but that's because it's a larger image, unless it's failed. Just check the image prompt. Nope, it's 76% done. So it's cranking along with that generation, with that seed. And it's going to show me the first two. So it says task complete. It's not showing my task. Now that's weird. It says task complete, but it's not updated my window for me. Okay. That's weird. Looks like I'm having problems with my browser window as well. I do have a lot of windows up. So I'm gonna have to find where it's popped those images. Just bear with me, because it's spat them out. It will be in my Art Nouveau AI gens. But it hasn't shown me the images, so I can't judge whether I want to use one of the images, which is really weird. I might just go and make image again, because that's odd. While I just go and have a look and see if I can find what it's just generated. But if it doesn't work the way that you expect, you can probably bet that's because they're developing it right this very second. Yep, okay, well, it did generate some results. So I'm going to jump into Photoshop while it's processing that last request. So it's going to do another gen for me. While it's doing that, let's jump back into Photoshop with what it's generated, so I can at least show you what it generated, since it's obviously a little bit buggy at the moment. I've got it in AI Pix and foreground read. So this is what it's generated for me. So I group by type and open them all up at once. So these are the new reads, which, remember that we asked? Come on. Sorry, I've got two dogs in here. They're barking at the noise underneath the house. Okay, so we've got some foreground reads. They look very realistic. Probably, maybe a bit too realistic for what we want to try and do. So we might add an artist style. Maybe we'll add Monet, but it's doing it the right way anyhow. It's just creating the foreground. So if I can show you a little demonstration of what we're doing. Again, I use the magic wand tool, and I just selected the blue using the magic wand tool. You can use the color selection tool, but I'm having issues with that. Can't figure it out at the moment. And if I go back into my background, I must have closed it. Reworks. Oh, I heard Stable Diffusion just finished that last request. So it was previs 01. That's what we were working with. you can see it's too small. So I've just copied and pasted it straight in, and it's too small, which I knew it was going to be. So I'm just going to delete that paste because I haven't done the upscale part of it yet. So let's just jump back into Stable Diffusion. I know we're bouncing around software right now. Okay, it's working properly for me now. Because I couldn't really do the next step unless I could see these to select the reads. So let's select, just need to make this a bit smaller so everything's in screen. Let's select this final seed, use that as the input for our next generation. So it's taken my very rough oil painting looking seed and it's turned it into a nice realistic grassy foreground, which is fantastic, except I kind of want it to be a little less realistic. So I'm going to scroll down my image modifiers and go into the artist submenu, and I'm going to choose an artist that has a more distinctive style. So let's see. Actually, I'm going to go and I'm going to choose Monet again because he's definitely got a distinctive style. So we've selected Monet, and now he is here in the image modifiers. So now let's click make image. Actually, what I'm going to do is before I click make image, I'm going to assume that this is going to work out. And I'm going to click upscale the image to 4 times the resolution so that we can quickly move on to the next stage and paste whatever it generates into the foreground. So let's generate this image because it's going to take a little while. Ugh. More out of milk. So don't have my normal coffee. It's starting to fade. I tried to have a black coffee and it was too strong compared to what I normally drink. Okay, 1 minute 30 seconds. Yeah, it's surprising how long 1 minute and 30 seconds is. Okay, so one of the things that I usually select is I usually choose random image when I'm doing an initial image, because it's definitely using that initial image to generate the next version. But I noticed when it's got seed up and it's just using the seed, the first version of it, which you'll see because it'll do it again, always looks really pixelated and distorted. It's very strange, but I'm sure it's going to do it again. Unless they've fixed that. If they fix that, they'll be making a liar of me. But I have the video evidence from the last 3 videos where it's done it just about every time. So it's saying 1 minute and 30 seconds approximately. Let's have a look. But no, it's already finished. It's finished the first 2. So these are the first 2. So there it is again. So you see the first one looks kind of distorted and weird, kind of pixelated. The second one is perfect. That's kind of what I wanted. It's a very oil painted, impressionistic look. It's Claude Monet style, and it's going to be a really good layer in After Effects. I can kind of see this. I could even like add a warp tool in After Effects if I wanted to and make the grass move in the wind as an animation. But yeah, that's getting a bit too complicated for one video. Let's just see the final 2 images and see how it does with these last 2 images, and if I'm happy, which I will be. I'm going to move on to the branches. Six seconds to go. And just check my stream quality. Oh, yeah, just HD. All right. 3 seconds, and it's gonna save my next 2 generations. There we are. So I've got 3 that are usable, and number 4, because I had random, I didn't have random image selected. Number 4 is too distorted, digitized. Excuse me. So I'm going to choose this one, this top one. So we're going to download that. The reason why is because this has got a little bit more color, and I can see the strokes, the AI generated paintbrush strokes. Excuse me, I know I'm burping a lot, but I'm allergic to just about everything I eat. Okay, so let's jump back into Photoshop real quick and just post our grass over the top of our main layer. So there's the original grass, our painted grass. But let's open up our new version. So there's the foreground grass. So that's what Stable Diffusion has created for me. Then I'm going to grab my magic wand tool and click onto the blue, and it's selected pretty much all of the blue. I'm going to feather the selection. So I go into the selection submenu, go down to modify, and in the modify selection menu, go down to the very bottom of that where it says feather, and I'm going to change the feathering to, actually I'm going to up it to 6. Okay. And I'm going to expand the selection. So I'm going to go back and go select, modify, expand, and I'm going to expand the selection by 6 pixels as well to allow for the feathering. So now if I have to invert that selection. So I go Shift Control I to invert that selection. Now I've selected the grass. You can see that only the grass selected and not the boundaries of the blue. So then I go Control C to copy, or edit copy, if you can't remember my shortcuts. And I'm ready to paste into my previs. So here's my previs, and I'm ready to paste. Control V to paste. And there's my new Monet foreground grass, which I can just sort of shuffle into place. And then I can delete the old foreground, but you can see there's the old foreground layer, and there's the new one. So I definitely like the new one, which is what we want. We want to drop some sort of rough stuff into Stable Diffusion, get it to do all the hard work for us, so we have more time to go out for coffees and dates. So we'll delete that foreground, and I'm going to rename layer 4 as foreground, because it's the new foreground, and it's the very top layer. The very top layer is always going to be the foreground layer. It's a bit high, but so I'm going to drop the grass down a bit, quite a bit. But if we unselect the background now, you can see, I can see that blue. So this is the reason why I went with the original foreground, isn't it? So in order to get rid of that blue better, what I could do is I could just be really aggressive with my feathering even more. So if I could go up, if I move it up again, because we've got so much grass, we've got way too much grass. This is what we can do. If we move it up like this, now if I use the magic wand and select into the sky, I'm on the foreground layer still. You can see it's still feathered, but then expand it like heaps. So if I go selection, expand, modify, expand, and expand it, let's see, let's try 60 pixels, which is a lot. All right, so that's 60 pixels. Maybe let's expand it even more. Let's do another 60. Modify, expand, another 60. There we go. So now we should cut off just about all of that blue. Add another feathering So feather it by 6, and we can just delete, press delete, and it will have cut off all that blue. So yeah, I'm really not happy with the results still, but I think you get the idea, and I just want to keep on moving on because yeah, we still have to get all the stuff into After Effects and moving. But we do have some layers, so maybe we can just maybe we'll just leave it at that for layers, because I tell you what, with the foreground, to create a little bit of depth or more depth, what we're going to do, and we're not going to do it in this software, but we'll do it in After Effects, is that we're going to give this a blur because it's going to be out of focus. So we're going to create like a false feeling of depth of field by giving the foreground a blur. And we'll play around maybe with the background and give that a little bit of a blur as well. We'll just see how we go. So that's the plan. So I won't try and muck around with the branches. I will with the final image, so I might come back because I can use the branches for just one lesson on its own, just for overpainting. So we won't worry about the branches for now. And instead, let's bring all of this stuff into After Effects now and start to give it some motion, because really that's what this video is primarily about. So now I'm going to fire up After Effects. So if you have After Effects, I'm sorry, we're out of Stable Diffusion now, we're into After Effects. Yeah, get that ready to go. So here's After Effects, and I'm going to create a new composition in After Effects. I just need to remember to save my previs. So let's create a new composition and let's make it full HD. Oh, sorry, ultra high definition. So we've got ultra 4K, and change the frame rate to 24 frames per second. So that's going to be good for my monitor. And it's reflective of the size of the Photoshop file. We'll rename it. So I'm just right clicking on it and renaming it. Art Nouveau '01. Now I'm going to import the layers that we've created in Photoshop individually. So you can't see my submenu folders or my import folders, but what I'm doing is I'm right clicking into my project window here underneath Art Nouveau. I'm right clicking into it, and then I'm scrolling down to import, which brings up another submenu. Then I'm going down to file, which is the first part of the section. Then I'm going into my reworks folder where I've saved off the Photoshop file, which is called Previs. Which version of Previs is it? Previs 02 is what I called it. So I'm bringing in the layers for Previs as a Photoshop file, as footage. Now, when I go import, it brings up another menu, which you also can't probably see, which says merge layers or choose layer, and I'm going to select choose layer, and then by default it's going for foreground, so that's good. We'll start with the foreground. All right, so you couldn't see all what I just described, but I probably have to set this up as a proper screen capture rather than capture the software. But you can see the foreground is in here now, and this is the preview for it. And if I literally drag that into the composition, it's perfectly in place because we've set up our composition perfectly in Photoshop. So I'm going to continue and import the other layers. So I go back and I go and select the same file, same Photoshop file. But this time when I go to choose layer, I'm going to select the sky. And I'm going to drag that in. And I'm going to do the same thing with the background. File, import Previs 01, choose layer, background. So you can see why I took the time to label everything correctly. And I'm going to drag the background in between the foreground and the sky. There it is, perfectly in place where we want it. And the last thing I need is the character. So I'm going to import file. Previs 01 is the file that the Photoshop file that I created. And I'm going to choose character. And drag the character in between the background and the foreground. Okay, so there it all is nicely in After Effects. If we can minimize this bit. So that's our composition. These are all separated layers. They're all changeable and hideable. So I can hide the foreground, I can hide the character, I can hide the background. But at the moment, they're all 2D layers. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this box. Well, you see underneath my little cursor here, there's a little square, and on my version, it brings up a little text prompt that says 3D layer. Underneath that 3D square cube is a box next to each of these. If you can't see these, it's probably because you've got these sections hidden, because you can hide and unhide them. So down here, you can see the expand or collapse layer styles, or layer panels. So I've got the first one selected. This one, if you can see my cursor hovering over it. Now expand or collapse the layer switches panel. That's the first one. That's the one that has the 3D layer submenu or checkbox. So now that checkbox is revealed, I'm going to change all of these layers into 3D layers. So they're all 3D layers, but they're all 3D layers that are at exactly the same place, if that makes sense, at the moment. And that's not what we want. We want them all to be separated in 3D space. But it's not going to make a difference at the moment because we don't have a camera. So selecting the foreground, I'm going to go up to new layer and I'm going to create new camera. And I'm going to keep 2-node camera selected and enable depth of field and click OK. Okay, so that's created the camera in the view. I think by default what we see is the camera. So because I've got depth of field selected, what should happen in theory is if I push the sky background back, it should move out of the depth of field. So let's just try that. And what I mean by push back is if I change the location of it. So if I look, and if I expand the submenu for the sky layer, there's a transform menu, and I expand that as well. You can see it's got position and anchor point. Position is the one we're working with, and position is also probably what we're going to animate a little bit. But for now, in fact, we're probably not going to animate any of these. We're probably going to animate the camera. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the position at the last part of it, which is how far forward or back it is. This is X, Y, and Z. Z is forward or back in 3D space. So see, by changing it that way in the negative space, the reason why it's blocking everything else out is because now it's in front of everything. So it's at negative Z, which is in front of a 0 point of our XY axis. That is the wrong place for it to be. We want it to be in the opposite direction. We want it to be, let's try 250. Actually, let's go a bit further. Let's go to 1,000, around about 1,000. So distance wise, it's 1,000 points or 1,000 pixels away from our 0 point axis on the Z. As you can see, it's not going to look right because its scale is, not right compared to the rest of these elements, but I can change that by just literally going to the scale here underneath position and just scaling it up. So I'm scaling it up so it looks right and fills out the entire screen. So the next thing to do is to move the background. So I'm going to select the background, and I'm going to do the same thing with the background. So I'm going to expand out the background, expand out its transform submenu. We're in its position underneath anchor point, and I'm going to go plus 500. Okay. Actually, let's make it 7634. So let's make it 7634. And again, same problem with the scale. So I'm going to scale it back up. So it's bigger, but it's further away. But it looks the same. But actually, it's not. In 3D space, it's not. And that'll become apparent when I start to move the camera around. So the last thing to do, well, it's not the last thing. The next thing to do is the character itself. So let's grab the character. Let's drop down the transform menu and go into the position for the character, and we'll change the character's position to, let's make it 500. So the character is at 5. Actually, that's too far away. Let's make it just 200. The character is at 200, and the foreground is at 0. Okay, so that's where all those layers are. The camera as well is currently at 0. So if I grab the camera now into its transform menu, you can see it's also got a position. Actually, the camera is set to -2000. So if I move the camera, you can see the camera's moving, but you'll also notice that there's a nice parallax kind of thing that's happening now with the layers, because all of those layers are now in 3D space, which looks really cool. And the other thing I can do is, if I change the height of the camera, or the angle, or the rotation of the position of the camera, it also creates this lovely parallax kind of feel to it, because of the way in which we set all those layers up as 3D layers in After Effects. So that essentially is how we're going to animate it, or at least this stage of it. So our first animation is just going to be with the camera. So let's do that. We'll grab everything. We're just grabbing the camera, and we're going to, next to the position on the camera is a little stopwatch icon. Now, if I click on that, it's created a key, what we call a keyframe at 0.0 of our timeline. So at the very beginning of our timeline now is a key, and that's our first position. But what we'll actually do is we'll move that key to 1 second in, so about 25 frames in, which is over 1 second. So 1 second, because we're working at 25 frames per second, 1 second would actually be 24. But yeah, so at this point, nothing has changed, nothing's been animated. But then let's go forward to 200, and 200 is going to be the final point for our animation, for this part of the animation, for the zoom, for the first zoom. Actually, we're just going to do one zoom. So we'll move to 400. Excuse me, I'm changing my mind on the fly. So we've got our position set up, and we know that if we move back and forwards with the position, it's going to create a nice parallax. So we're going to do a zoom in, and that's going to create that cool parallax. And we're going to also change the Y position a little bit, because changing the Y position also creates a little bit more parallax. So now if I scroll backwards, you can see it all animating. And you can also see that after I did that, it created another keyframe here that I can drag around to make the speed of the animation faster or slower. At the moment, I'm just going to leave it at 400. But if I press the Shift key on my keyboard, it's now it's very, not real time, but it's pre-rendering our layers and our animation in After Effects, so we can see it all kind of like see the slow zoom in and parallax effect that's happening with the layers. Okay, so it's done it once, and now it's sort of playing it back in a little bit more real time. But say we want it to be faster, all I need to do is just drag that, say, to 100. So now it's going to be like a reasonably fast move. And then we could even add like another move into it, like at 200, we could add another move, just changing that x axis a little bit more. Sorry, that y axis, changing the y axis a little bit. And actually we will change the x axis a little bit as well, which also creates a little bit more parallax kind of effect. I'm just keeping an eye on the edge of my frame, so I can push this. I can see I can push this quite a bit. If I push it too far, things will start to come in from, yeah, see, there's the sky starting to come in. So that's as far as I can go as the sky. So I'll just go that far. So now if I scroll back and I press on the shift key, I can see my first zoom, and now I can see my kind of turny zoom. It's just rendering it now. It's pre-rendering it. So it's not playing it back in real time, and then it's finished. So now if I play it back from the beginning, there's my first zoom, and here's my second zoom in real time, with that sort of subtle X move. And if I wanted to, I can also go the other way and change the tilt again in the opposite direction, and change the X axis also in the opposite direction. So it'll create another point of animation. So it'll have to re-render all of that again. So you can see that's quite a lot of movement, and quite a lot of depth for something that's really just composited out of like 2D objects. So now it's going to play it in real time. If you've got a fast enough computer, which I do. So, I mean, that's one thing to sort of note. I've got it at full resolution playing back at real time because I've got a good computer. Because After Effects also takes up an awful lot of RAM. I'm going to save this file off as well. One thing to always remember is to save off your work as you're working on it, just in case it crashes out, especially if you're working with really large files like this. So I'm going to call this After Effects, no, Art Nouveau. '01. Okay, so you can see, like, I probably want everything to be a little bit faster. So we're going to drag these keyframes. What these are now, these control points are now keyframes. So I'm going to drag those keyframes and just shorten these animations a little bit. And what I can also do is I can change my final duration for my composition by dragging this work end to, say, 200. So now it's all happening within 200 frames. So, you know, within just a few minutes. Okay, so how does this look in real time? So yeah, so that's kind of cool. One thing I'd probably do is I'd probably take my first keyframe, because I had a hold frame there, and I'll just drag it there so that it's actually starting with the zoom. That will actually make that first zoom a bit slower as well, because it just didn't look that great. And we also don't need to hold on a final frame. So what we'll do is we'll grab these three keys. We won't grab the first one because I quite like that slow zoom in first. We'll grab these 3 keys and drag the final key so it's at the final work end area of our timeline. So now I'll just re-render. So it's re-rendering into the cache, which again I can only do because I've got a lot of cache space assigned and a lot of VRAM. Okay, so we've got a little animation happening. I mean, it's not the most amazing animation, but it is an animation. And there's certain things that we can do within that animation to make it look, a little bit more interesting, or create like animations within animations. Like I could change the hue of the background, or so I could actually literally animate the sky. So if I go into the sky layer now, I can show you that. While I've got the sky layer selected, if I go into the effects and presets, I'll just go into the color correction submenu and select color balance hue HLS, which is hue, luminance, and saturation, and just drag that on top of that sky layer. Now you can see it's brought up this effect control menu, and it's got this hue section, it's got saturation, and it's got lightness. For starters, I can change the saturation up. I can move the scale up, and it makes the sky look oversaturated, which I'm not going to use that. So Control Z. I can change the lightness to make it lighter, and I don't want to do that either. All I want to do is do a hue animation on the background. So again, with the effect at the beginning of the animation, making sure that I'm at the beginning of the animation, I click on the stopwatch icon, setting the first key of the animation. If I want to see that key, I can see it by expanding the sky layer, and you can see it's got an effects submenu, and so there's the effects submenu, and there's color balance, which is the animation. And if I expand out the color balance, you can see the hue, which is up here. You can see it down here, plus the key and the key that we've created. Okay, so this is how we animate effects, which is really important when it comes to After Effects. So we're starting with that sort of light sky. So let's just change it. We'll drag the sky to the end frame and go to the hue, and I'll just change the hue. So let's change the hue so it's kind of that orangey tone like that. So now if I scroll back and forwards, you can see we're going from a blue background, and it's sort of changing. It's almost sun setting on us, to a orange sky. And then if I wanted to, I could drag that key back, and I could keep on going. I could keep on going with the hue, so it's like back to the blue in a weird way. Where are we going? I keep on missing blue. It's cycling it 3 times. You can see it's ×3, which is not ideal. I just want to get back to the blue, baby. Alright, that'll do. But I could reduce the saturation and reduce the lightness as an animation if I wanted to. That was my point, but I'm not really doing a very good job of executing it. And now let's see what it does. I think I fluffed up that key. If I fluffed up the key, I've got an easy solution for getting rid of it. So you can see it's changing the hue again in the background. It's doing all sorts of weird stuff. But what I might want to do is just literally make the background disappear. and merge in like a night sky. So I could have like stars selected, and if I go into the transform, there's an opacity. So if I had stars selected, I could select the opacity, create a keyframe there, then go to the end, and then change the opacity from 100% to 0. And then I put my star layer underneath. I don't have any star layer to put underneath. But so what would happen would be that the animation would play through, and it'd get to that point, and then it would start to get rid of the sky, revealing the stars in the background. Yeah. Or we could put another background in there. But I'm not going to do that. So let's get rid of that opacity transform. Let's just leave it so it's changing colors. And I'm pretty happy with that. So now that I'm really, pretty happy with my composition, it's got a little bit of movement in it. It's got a few sort of wiggles to the camera at the end. It's just to show off its 3D-ness. Excuse me. If I wanted to, I could put a displacement layer on this, and I could show you sometime how to do a displacement layer or a normal map. I don't think you can do normal maps in this. Which would give a little bit more depth to the character or depth to the background. One thing I was going to show you was the blurring. So I think I said, though the camera has a depth of field set to it, you can see it's got depth of field on, and it's got a focal distance there. So at the moment, the focal distance is set to 2000 pixels because the camera is 2000 pixels away. We could actually animate the focal distance as well. So I could select depth of field, select the stopwatch icon for the depth of field for the camera, and then move it to, say, here, and change the focal distance. So if I change the focal distance, let's see what happens. What I want to do is I want to try and make the focal distance smaller so that some of these other layers are out of focus. Let's see. All right, it's starting to happen. So you can see at about 900 or about 1000, she's looking a bit out of focus. The background's a bit out of focus. The sky is quite out of focus, but the foreground is still reasonably in focus. And then if I move it even further down, she's out of focus, but the foreground's still kind of in focus. And that's because of where the foreground is in comparison to her. So, that's one way of doing it, is to create this kind of depth focus using the camera. I'm going to change the focal distance so that it's there, so she's definitely in focus. I'm going to try and create a fake focal depth by selecting the foreground, and I'm just going to add a lens blur to the foreground element while leaving everything else. So if I go into Effect, Blur, I'm going to select Camera Lens Blur, and you can see it's created a little blurring to that foreground element. And I can make that, you can see the effect controls here for the foreground. So if I just select the camera blur, go back to our first frame. So say we want the camera to kind of be a little bit more, like a little bit more out of focus at this frame. What we can do is we can increase the blur radiance. So if I select the stopwatch icon here, but increase the blur radiance to, so let's try 36. I'd say that's too high. Let's try 10. let's make it a happy medium. Let's make it 20. So there's quite a lot of blur there at 20. So what we're going to do is when the camera zooms in and gets a bit closer, we're going to sharpen up the foreground and reduce the blur radiance back down to 5. Like that. Okay, so now if I press play, shift and pre-render that into the cache, let's see how that looks. But you can see how creating a foreground element out of focus gives it that another sort of 3D feel to it. So you can create different levels of feel of 3D just by using blur, a blur tool with your layers. So it's taken a little while to render it because the blur, I've got a blur effect on there now, which I guess is pretty RAM hungry. See, I might want to raise the grass up so it's covering her feet, because it's supposed to cover this issue here. I need to get some water. I'm getting dehydrated now. But we're gonna wrap this video in a second. I think the last thing, I can't even really show you the playback, so really I just won't show you the render. I'll just show you how to set up a render, and we'll just put a pin in it. Okay, so now it's doing our turn. Which is definitely, at least to me, it's giving a kind of 3D feel. It's not too realistic. It still looks like a stylistic thing. There you go. So there you have it. There's a bit of animation in After Effects using layers that you've created in Stable Diffusion, using different image prompts that you've fed images in from, and also image prompts where you've just used text to create the prompt. So I think that's a pretty good pin to put in this lesson. Definitely looks good to me. All right, yeah, it looks good to me. I was just wigging out because I saw there's no webcam up, but that doesn't matter. As long as you can hear me. Cool. Alrighty. So there you go. So there's a recap on what we did today. We created a multi-layered Photoshop image using elements that we've created in Stable Diffusion. Then we imported all those layers into After Effects. We animated some of those layers. We created 3D depth to those layers, and we also animated some hue changes and some blur changes to give it a little bit more of a sort of 3D dimensional feel. And it looked pretty good, for something that took us about an hour and a half to do. That looked okay. I mean, I could get away. I could drop that into my documentary with a little bit of classical music over the top and a bit of voiceover explaining, some of the aspects of Art Nouveau, and it would fill in a nice gap in my documentary. So I hope you like that. I hope you got something from that, and you've got some useful tools in your repertoire for your 3D digital creation and for Stable Diffusion. Take what you've learned away and let me know how you go. Post into the comments on these vlogs, and maybe if you feel brave, post a video up and show us what you've created. I'm sure you can create something better than that. So yeah, signing off. Thank you for watching, and until next time.